Welcome back to the forecast brought to you by Headstorm, the show that teaches you how to engineer growth by learning from industry luminaries to provide you with tactical steps you can use tomorrow. Hi, I'm Julian Placino, host of Headstorm Forecast. In today's forecast, we're joined by Elsie Libertini. Elsie is the Vice President of Vendor Finance and Digital CX Solutions with PNC. Today, she's talking about audience drivers, terminology, users, and how sometimes, regardless of your best efforts, things simply don't click. Elsie, it's an honor. Let's get started.
Interesting, our choice of words, Nitin, because you tend to use the word user and I tend to use the phrase target audience, and kind of two different but important perspectives in developing any kind of solution, right? The user point of view from a more objective kind of technical needs, and the target audience from an adoption or an onboarding perspective, what you're trying to achieve, and both are critical puzzle pieces. I would say in the development of any product.
No, absolutely. And I definitely can appreciate the distinction, because a lot of times user can be seen as a very sort of technical piece of the puzzle, whereas target audience adds a bit of that empathy that you need to have in place to be able to learn and appreciate who you're solving for, who's that person that you're solving for. So you touched on a couple of things that I wanted to sort of dig into a little bit, particularly with the elements of understanding your target audience. It's important, you talked about motivations, aspirations. So in your experience, what are all those different elements that make up that dynamic of understanding your target audience?
The closest that you can get to that audience, I would say, the better. And the reason being is that you and I have had the benefit of doing ride-alongs, right, through sheer observation. There is so much to learn when you get out of the four walls of your space.
Yep.
And everything from the environment in which the person is working out of, whether they're stationary, whether they're in transit, what kind of Wi-Fi abilities do they have, all of those things factor into the experience. And much of that is not learned or figured out unless you're actually in lockstep spending some time with your audience. And we've had the benefit of doing that in various experiences. And I've even done it through some courses that I have taken, and through project work, trying to understand what might be some good products or services for, a specific age group or what have you, and spending time with those folks in the space where they are living, or in the space where they spend their time doing the activity that is what you're trying to impact, makes a world of difference in terms of empathizing with your audience from a kind of like a 360-degree view, right? Not just the task at hand, but what are all of these factors that lead to how smoothly or how complicated it can be to perform whatever activity it is that you're observing. It says a lot when you're riding along with some sales folks, and many of them are in transit, and preparation work is happening in the vehicle between appointments, or in a cab ride in Manhattan getting from point A to point B. All of that kind of factors into understanding what that complete experience is like. So that makes a world of difference in empathizing with your audience.
Yeah, and as a part of empathizing with your audience, I think it also becomes pretty important to understand why are you doing this. Because if you don't clearly understand the user's motivation in terms of why are you doing this, then you sort of lose sight of how can you motivate them to continue to engage in this platform, and it becomes a sheer activity of taking a manual process and putting it through the technology lens, but you sort of lose out on the adoption piece of it because you have missed the opportunity to understand their motivations and to be able to align that tool set to those specific motivations.
Yeah, that's it's can be a bit of a trap especially when you're focused so much internally around the what of the matter versus the why of the matter.
Yeah.
And you can get into a trap where you're hand sanding the what and lose sight of the why you're doing it in the first place, and that why, or those drivers from your audience point of view, can help you hone in on the things that matter. They can help you hone in on a sense of prioritization. And the two don't always line up, right? I think the drivers that you may have for putting forth a product or service internally, when you go outside of the four walls of your space, you may find that those drivers don't necessarily line up to the motivations of the audience that you're seeking to use your product. And, it's good to know those things earlier versus later when you've invested so much time and effort and money into something that may not line up. So.
No, that's 100% right. And so many times we get in a room, we have some of those sessions where, all right, let's come up with the business drivers and what do you guys feel is important, and we go through the prioritization exercise only to find out that, hey, when you go outside of the four walls of this organization, customer, just for example, saying, oh, we want to maximize our customer experience. Well, your customer experience is through your employee experience. So what you really want to do is you want to optimize and you want to equip your internal employees to be able to then impact your customer experience. And it's more of a 1-2 step versus directly being able to make an impact on that customer experience.
User versus target audience. That's a biggie. I always thought they were a bit like synonyms. Turns out they're more like different sides of the same coin. It's critical to understand that the closer you get to your target audience, the more you comprehend that it is a human being with emotions and experiences. You need empathy to really grasp what they are and how to reach them. Sometimes your audience drivers don't line up with what your team has come up with and what they believe is a user-friendly experience. Next up, we'll talk about organizational outputs, why sometimes perfection might be detrimental, and how to build tech journeys with your audience in mind.
So coming back to our subject of target audience here, you've sort of pointed out some of the output from that particular exercise. Can you, in your experience, I know that there are many different ways and there are so many disciplines out there in terms of human-centered design and design thinking. In your experience, what are some of the outputs that are most beneficial to organizations to kind of start with, and then slowly build that discipline to be able to get an appreciation and value from the things that they're working on?
Well, I mean, I think the insight gathering component and engagement with your audience as early and as often as possible will produce lots of outputs in terms of learning. And I think those learnings, whether they be through sheer demonstration of what you have to date, sharing not so perfect visuals or sketches or what have you, gaining those first impressions with those kinds of artifacts are invaluable. So I think the learnings in terms of reactions, verbal, nonverbal, ideally, if you have kind of prototypes where your audience can engage with and sort of kick the tires with, will produce some just invaluable results in terms of expectations that may or may not line up with what you originally had in mind. So I would say the insight gained through consistent engagement throughout the life cycle of your product development is just invaluable. And I think many times folks want to have something nice and shiny and polished before you get it out in front of your audience to react to. Is a tendency, right? That is many times not will not get you to where you need to be. I think being transparent with work in progress, with drafts and things of that nature, will lend itself to some invaluable insights that, again, it's the validating of assumptions that you may have made, or learning that you're completely off base and you may have to start from scratch. Understanding that sooner or earlier rather than later is a huge impact and output that is coming out of that engagement.
Yeah, and as they've said, like, don't let perfection sort of get in the way of progress. Many times people treat the outputs from this exercise as sort of as a snapshot, and it's really a living, breathing document, right? So when you build user personas, when you're building a user journey, you want to constantly go back to it and make sure that you're kind of continuing to work in that same frame of reference. And if you're not, then you make those adjustments, and those adjustments then distill down to the specific user stories, or perhaps the feature sets, or anything else that sort of misaligns with that particular persona or that journey. So I think that we definitely want to highlight the fact that this is a constant, ongoing, iterative, living, breathing document, and it's not a one-time sort of one and done scenario.
People want solutions where A leads to B and B is a prize, something that either rewards them or solves an issue. It's important to gather insight into what your target audience actually demands, and sometimes they aren't even aware of it. Most of the time, your team simply wants to create something cool, a shiny and bright testament to their engineering talent, but that doesn't always line up with what your audience actually needs. Before going all the way, get some feedback. Don't wait until the product is perfect to get it out there into your actual consumer's hands. In the final part of this conversation, we'll prod the landmine that is understanding your audience too late.
Yeah.
And many times, when we've had those conversations, we've also talked about how, technology really needs to be a natural extension of the target audience, of the person who's using it. Can you elaborate on that, just so people are not sort of visualizing the phone duct taped to their hand, sort of an extension or a metaphor?
Yeah, well, I think it depends on who you talk to. Some folks do have technology literally attached to their wrist or their go-to at the bedside or what have you. But the natural extension of using a solution when it matters, right? And so think of someone in transit in a commercial space and looking to prep for a customer interaction, right? And wanting to know some key kind of real-time facts, right? And so you're looking at an app or a solution that's going to get you to those answers very quickly. Or if you don't have an app or solution that's going to get you to those answers quickly, you may have cheat sheets or workarounds to get to that same spot, but may not be as simple or as easy to use, or as something that requires a little bit more effort, which may not be ideal for someone in that spot. So when you have something that becomes a natural part of, in this case, the sales process, right? Or in my car buying example, I'm going out to get financing ahead of time, right? So I'm seeking an approval before I walk in the door, type thing, right? So you're seeking solutions that are going to get you to the task at hand. So grabbing for those products, whether it be a phone or an app or things of that nature, that line up with what it is that you're trying to achieve and get that kind of quick, real-time information or answer is going to be the go-to, right? It's just the sheer go-to. Oh, I'm doing this now. I'm going to go to this app because that's going to get me to what I need. That is not. That sounds easier than it actually is to achieve, in my opinion. Most times, it's not a build it, they will come scenario. So it takes work to get to that point where your product or solution is a natural part of that routine or that activity that is important to that person. So
absolutely. And as you were kind of talking through it, I was sort of visualizing two elements, right? The first element is getting an appreciation for that journey. What does it take from the moment that you've identified the need that you want to buy a car, all the way to driving that car into your lot or out of the lot, and also having an appreciation throughout the journey. That journey is not going to be linear. You'll take one step forward, two steps back, and then you'll perhaps make a leap to 5 and then come back to 2. So it's definitely not linear. And also having technology there, but not expecting the user to have big, long amounts of engagement. There might be times where you use it for 30 seconds and you're done, and it got you what you needed, and that's success. Versus other times where it might take them a little longer to kind of get engaged with your platform to be able to go from point A to point B. And the measurement of the success should be embedded in the action or what they're trying to get out of it, versus the time or the amount of time you spent on it, or how many buttons did you click, or the sort of the sheer analytics piece of it, right?
You are what people say behind your back, and so is your company. Your audience is the ultimate benchmark, the one that will rate and quite possibly give you a failing grade. It's important to integrate them in every step along the way, from inception to improvements. Mapping out what they need, their journey, even if it's half-baked, goes a long way. The Forecast's next segment will give you the inside scoop on how to build user stories.
So I think so far we've hopefully established the fact that, hey, understanding who is your target audience, why is it important to understand your target audience? How do you go about doing it? What do you need to do? I think the sort of the question that we haven't gotten to is a lot of companies either shy away from sort of engaging in the exercise, be it cost related, be it it's difficult to get to our users. Sometimes they don't even have a clear understanding of their target audience. So how would you recommend companies get started? Bare bones, right? Sort of more as a way to be able to get into the entry level of the space without making it an elaborate effort, because I know this particular space can get very complicated very quickly.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's something to be said about paying the piper now or paying it later, right? I mean, I think from a sheer cost perspective, if you're not investing in understanding your audience now, you're going to pay for it later.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to end up trying to understand your audience later, and why is it that they're not using your product? That being said, I think there's many kind of low fidelity ways of engaging with your audience. I recall, and it's still on my bucket list, not necessarily bucket list, but to-do list, to get some better at my drawings and visualization. But even just sheer, whiteboarding and drawing some what your interpretation of an experience is goes a long way.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't have to be building and investing in clickable prototypes and things of that nature. If you have an opportunity, whether it be directly or maybe through folks that you're working with that have closer access to your audience, and mm-hmm. collaborating through sheer visuals and conversation as early and as often, doesn't have to be a high investment scenario.
Yeah. And going through, as you pointed out, just whiteboarding exercises, collaborative exercises. You don't have to be the best at drawing. You don't have to have the perfect template for creating a persona, as long as you sort of articulated their motivations and their pain points. You don't have to have the most sophisticated journey mapping with all the fancy iconography, like literally on a whiteboard trying to draw it out. Provides enough of a baseline to where you can go and continue to build on those things.
Yeah. I mean, I recall through several experiences of my own, having maybe 10 minutes to draw something up, and it's like literal stick figures, right? But the fact that I only had 10 minutes, it was the best that I can do, just was invaluable, right? Because I didn't spend too much time hand sanding something that actually what I put together fit the bill in terms of sparking the conversation.
Yeah.
So I think half-baked is okay when you're partnering with audiences that understand that you're looking to build something that provides value
mm-hmm.
to them, and most people are open to that and actually welcome it, because the fact that they're able to offer perspective and be a part of a creation of whether it's a product or service is value in and of itself.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I love the fact that you called out the half-baked piece of it, because, when you make someone a part of the building process, then the adoption is a very easy process. You're not sort of having to arm twist them just for them to use that technology when you yourself have put in a lot of the effort in building it in the first place. So it definitely makes it a much more straightforward conversation.
You really do develop self-advocate kind of opportunities with your audience that allows for better adoption success. Nothing speaks better than someone experiencing the leveraging of your product or service that is closest to you being in the soup with that same experience, right? So having folks be a part of that journey with you, that the audience that you're trying to reach is another invaluable item to consider. It's just, again, if you're in the four walls of your space building something and then going out for the first time, you have to expect that you're not going to get it right. Right. And even when you do that sense of engagement and collaboration, you may get some of it right, but the shifting and the pivoting happens, and it's part of iteration, and that is it's not necessarily a one and done. But I think that if you allow room to breathe and to pivot, to kind of be in lockstep with your audience, will ultimately pay off, right? Because it's again, people have choices. It's not necessarily, you don't necessarily have a captive audience in many cases. That if you're not kind of changing and growing and iterating, that you're going to get left behind.
Thanks as always for tuning in to The Forecast, brought to you by Headstorm, with your hosts, myself, Julian Placino, and Nitin Bhatia. As part of this vast community, we hope these tips and insights will make a difference, future-proof your business, your mindset, and help you surpass your expectations. Feel free to reach out. Our contact info is in the description. Hope to see you next time as The Forecast brings you more thoughts from industry leaders and strategies to engineer growth.